TikTok is fighting for survival in the US. Both Republicans and Democrats want it sold or banned because of its connections to China. So TikTok has been waging information warfare to try to convince lawmakers it's safe. And one of the ways it's doing that is by paying off fact-checkers. Welcome to Newspeak. I'm Holly Kellum. TikTok says it's just a fun video sharing app that creates community and promotes small businesses. U.S. lawmakers say it's a Trojan horse for China and have passed legislation to ban it. In addition to getting its supporters to lobby their members of Congress, TikTok is using information warfare to change the conversation about how much of a national security threat it is. Now, there are a few ways it's gone about this. One is running ads about how TikTok is a force for good in the U.S.
My name is John Lynch. I'm a member of the National Guard, and I use my TikTok channel to spread helpful and useful information to benefit military members and their families.
It obviously wants you to think of a community builder instead of national security threat when you hear the word TikTok. Another method it's using is sponsoring studies about how it's helping small businesses grow. It paid Oxford Economics to produce a study that says it helps 7 million small and medium-sized businesses and contributed $24.2 billion to the U.S. GDP in 2023. Basically, it wants to convince Americans it's become an integral part of America's economic infrastructure. And that study found its way into such stalwart publications as the Washington Post, LA Times, and Time magazine. And while the LA Times and WAPO get kudos for citing TikTok as paying for the study, Time magazine not so much. Not only did Time take the angle that TikTok was hoping for, it only mentioned briefly that lawmakers have cited national security concerns as the biggest reason for supporting a ban. Now, maybe everyone knows by now that TikTok is owned by ByteDance and that ByteDance is a Chinese company. And by law, all Chinese companies have to turn over any data the government asks for. But maybe some readers don't know, which is why it's important to explain, because that's why this is even a story. America's #1 enemy potentially has extremely sensitive information on over 170 million Americans, which is about half the U.S. population. Information like user location, data from your clipboard, and biometric information like face and voice prints. And that's not just me speculating. I took that all from TikTok's privacy policy, so they're not even denying they collect this stuff. There have also been leaks from within the company suggesting that Communist Party members have a God credential that lets them access Americans' data. A former ByteDance executive said that he saw the God credential being used to keep tabs on Hong Kong protesters and civil rights activists by monitoring their locations and devices, their network information, SIM card identifications, IP addresses, and communications. So it's not just theoretical that China could use TikTok as a weapon against those who disagree with it. Now, going back to how TikTok has tried to change the conversation about it being a national security threat, TikTok seems to have been pretty effective at paying off fact-checkers. Now, when I say paying off fact-checkers, you're probably thinking of some under-the-table bribe. What I mean is that they're using fact-checkers to fact-check their platform, and once those fact-checkers become reliant on TikTok for their revenue, they're less likely to sound the alarm about TikTok's many red flags, including this one. Now, before I dive into exactly how this works, I have to explain TikTok's connection to a very influential organization in the media world. If you're a journalist, you've probably heard of the Poynter Institute. It's one of the best-known journalism training centers in the US, if not the world.
For 50 years, Poynter has been the place where journalism's best gathers, and we want to share those lessons and learnings with as many news organizations around the country as we can.
Poynter doesn't just train journalists, though. It owns the Tampa Bay Times and a few other Florida publications, but probably where it has the most influence is on the fact-checking world. It's the home of the International Fact-Checking Network, which is used by companies like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Google News, and Google Fact Check Explorer. In other words, Poynter has a pretty outsized influence on the fact-checking world.
We're not just reaching journalists, we are reaching citizens.
Now, Poynter isn't just home to the International Fact-Checking Network, it's also the home of PolitiFact, one of the most influential fact-checking organizations in the US, if not the world. PolitiFact is one of the organizations that TikTok pays to fact-check its videos. And according to the PolitiFact website, TikTok is one of 2 organizations that pays more than 5% of its budget. Now, I wasn't able to find data on how much funding or what the overall percentage of PolitiFact's budget comes from TikTok. Poynter also didn't respond to my email asking about this, at least as of this recording. If it does respond, I will leave a note in the description below. But I'm guessing that TikTok must be a sizable portion of its budget because it's listed as one of the two biggest funders. Now, TikTok has also sponsored Poynter events like its fact-checking conference Global Fact 9 and Global Fact 10. And as if that weren't enough funding of Poynter programs, TikTok is also a funder of MediaWise, another Poynter project devoted to media literacy. Now, PolitiFact says that donors have no say in the ratings that PolitiFact issues, and that could very well be true. But TikTok execs don't necessarily have to pick up the phone to get, say, a PolitiFact editor to change a fact check. It could be enough for fact-check editors to worry that if they come down too hard on TikTok, TikTok might not renew their contract. And here's an example of where I think PolitiFact shows its conflict of interest. It did a fact check of Fox News host Brian Kilmeade claiming that the Chinese government owns TikTok's parent company ByteDance. Now, there isn't a lot of nuance to that statement, I'll give him that. But here's the problem. To label that claim false, PolitiFact relied heavily on TikTok's own data to refute Kilmeade's claim. TikTok claims that 60% of ByteDance is owned by international investors, 20% by the Chinese software engineers who developed the app, and 20% by the employees. But here's the thing. To say that ByteDance is a private company and operates in China is a lie. First of all, whether it's registered in the Cayman Islands or China, it doesn't matter. What matters is the control that the Chinese government has over it. Maybe PolitiFact doesn't know this, but it's common knowledge among China watchers that every major company in China has a Chinese Communist Party branch in it. That branch is responsible for making sure that the company is in line with the party's goals. And in the case of TikTok, a former ByteDance employee alleged that that enabled a special committee of Chinese Communist Party members stationed at the company to view all data collected by ByteDance, including those of U.S. users. Now, according to Human Rights Watch, ByteDance's Communist Party Committee is headed by ByteDance's vice president, and party members at ByteDance regularly gather to study President Xi Jinping's speeches. Secondly, TikTok has admitted, and PolitiFact has acknowledged in its fact check, that the Chinese government has taken what's called golden shares in Douyin, TikTok's Chinese equivalent, which is also owned by ByteDance. Golden shares are a small portion of the company's stock, say around 1%, that's held by a government entity that gives it outsized influence at the company, influence like veto power or a seat on the board. And while you can say that Douyin is just one of ByteDance's companies, it's one of, if not the most lucrative company that ByteDance owns. The other thing is how China considers ByteDance. When the Trump administration was trying to ban TikTok, China changed its export rules so that ByteDance would need its approval to sell its algorithm to a foreign company. So to consider ByteDance a private company independent of the Chinese government in the same way you would a private company in the US, I just don't think is accurate. Now, maybe that particular fact checker just wasn't very familiar with China, but it does also raise the question of whether they were influenced by their funding source. And here's the other thing. It's not just like PolitiFact is only fact-checking TikTok. It fact-checks a lot of other social media companies. And so how this fact-check is used in other social media companies, but also by journalists and ordinary citizens to gauge the veracity of this claim, it could potentially have a really big impact. And it's not just PolitiFact that TikTok is funding. I don't mean to just pick on PolitiFact. The Center on Technology Policy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill also receives funding from TikTok. Now, don't get me wrong, the center has a number of other funders that seem problematic as well, but that doesn't mean TikTok isn't trying to influence coverage by funding the center. Now, here's another interesting connection. The director of the center also apparently writes for Lawfare, which he disclosed in this article he co-authored about TikTok. I would say it actually does a really good job of laying out the issues in a pretty neutral way and doesn't play down TikTok's threat, but it does lobby for keeping the app, albeit with better data security. And last but not least, TikTok seems to be trying to gain influence in the fashion world by sponsoring the Met Gala this year, which is organized by fashion magazine Vogue. Since TikTok attracts a lot of creatives, that collaboration shouldn't come as a surprise. But again, was this an attempt to get good publicity in Vogue and other fashion-loving publications? If you ask me, it seems pretty obvious that it is. But what do you think? Do you think TikTok has been effective at changing the conversation about it being a national security threat? Or do you think that it's just wasted a lot of money? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, please share, subscribe, and hit that like button. Once again, I'm Kellum, and you're watching Newspeak.